Hello and welcome to lesson 19. This looks at how the UK influences the world through politics. So the task that you're going to have to do in the assignment is to explain the UK's political role in the world. Now that will require you to understand the content of this lesson, so I'm going to now go through the content and teach it to you. Hopefully this will make sense to you. So the first thing to understand is that the UK has a significant, even huge, but that can be debated, in fact should be debated, UK has a huge political influence through its membership of international organisations. So basically we have influence through our links in the world, through international politics. International means between nations. Inter means between, national is nations. So we work with other countries through groupings, organisations, and that's how we influence the world. Here's the UK flag. So next thing is this bit here. An international organisation is a group of countries working together towards a common purpose and agenda. You can use the word group, also club. Countries club together. There's also, you can think of it as a gang of countries, and countries can gang up on somebody else and boss them around. So one thing we talked about in class was the idea that politics happens at every level of human society, whether it's in friendship groups, there's friendship politics. There's school politics, how the school is run. There's politics in the workplace, how the boss is doing things and do you agree with him or her. There's politics in, obviously, locally, in local government, also in national government and internationally. So, and politics is all about power and how power is exerted. So this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about how the UK uses its power to influence, to change the world. Previously, we've been looking at other things. We've been looking at economics. We're going to be going on to cultural power as well. But this is looking at political power. So we are a member of 3 of these organisations, 3 international organisations. Before the end of January this year, we were part of 4 of these, but obviously we left the EU on the 31st of January 2020. But we're still very much a very active part of the United Nations, of NATO, and of the G7. Let's start off then by looking at the G7, the group of 7 countries. Now, this is from a summit which involved the EU, so it was G7 plus the EU. So here we have the Donald Tusk, who is the president of the European Council. We've got Justin Trudeau, who's the Prime Minister of Canada. Good old Trump, who's the President of the United States. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister. Macron, the President of France. Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. Giuseppe Conte, who sounds like a tennis player but actually is the Italian Prime Minister. And then Shinzo Abe, who is the Prime Minister of Japan. And these countries here make up the G7, and these are the leaders. So the G7 is essentially these sort of prime ministers and leaders. These are the leaders of the countries, and it's these 7 who are talking to each other, and they are working closely together. And because we are part of this club, this gang, this organisation, we are able to influence them through what we say and how persuasive our Prime Minister is. meeting at the G7 summit in New York in 2019. There's good old Macron, cheesy smile. Trump looks pretty unhappy to be there. Abe's pretty happy. This is Giuseppe Conte, Italian. There's Tusk. There's Boris. There's Trudeau. And there's Merkel, who's wiping away a tear of joy at being in this happy meeting. Okay, well, here's an example of when the G7 leaders held a web conference earlier this month to discuss the approach to the coronavirus. And here's Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister, who's talking to other six, because that's 6 people plus him, which is 7. Here's his webcam, here's his microphone. And so you've got, there's Rome, there's Conte, Paris, there's Macron, Washington, there's Trump, London, there's Boris. This is Trudeau when he was in self-isolation, sporting a goatee beard and lots of facial hair in Ottawa, Canada. And here's Merkel in Germany and Berlin. Basically, an organisation. It was established a long time ago in 1979 with the 7 most industrialised and powerful countries. They hold annual conferences, annual summits. A summit is a time when people meet together to discuss and work together on global issues. And because it's a very small club, a small gang, a small grouping, the UK has political influence over the other 6 countries. But because these countries are the most powerful countries in the world, it sort of suggests that the UK is powerful, because if we can influence the most powerful countries, then we must have a lot of power ourselves. The UN. The UN was established in 1945 at the end, just after the finish of the Second World War. It's currently got 193 members. But and its main aim was to promote peace, especially post-war. Headquarters in New York, but actually the UK is one of the founding members. And it is one of the Security Council permanent members. There are 5 countries that are always on the Security Council of the United Nations. Being on that council means that you can authorize military action on behalf of the United Nations. So the fact that we are always on that means that we have the power to authorize, to vote for, to authorize, or to use our veto. A veto is a block, to actually block military action. So therefore we can say yes or no to jet fighters going off and bombing places. Now, I don't know about you, but to my mind, I think that makes us fairly powerful as a country. We've got NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was set up again just after the Second World War. And this is really the Western countries of Western Europe were grouped together with the United States and Canada to form an alliance across the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, against any aggressors, basically the Soviet Union as it was, Russia plus its satellite states. And basically the treaty is, the agreement is that we will defend each other. If Russia attacks one member, then the rest of us will go in and fight them. They've got quite a large army, mind you, and quite a few nuclear weapons. But then so are the Americans. So, you know, it's, but let's not pick fights, I guess. So the USA, America, is the biggest military member. It's got the most powerful armies and navies and air force out of all the NATO members. It's got loads of mobile aircraft carriers where it can project its power anywhere around the world and send planes into anywhere around the world. But in Europe, the UK and France are fairly much equal second largest members. I think France has a slightly larger military than the UK, making the UK a close second in terms of military power in the world, in Europe. So having the second most powerful military in Europe, the UK is often called on to enact NATO military action with the US and with France. So again, this is how we can politically influence, by actually saying, well, if you don't do this, then with our NATO buddies, we're going to come in and get you. Okay, finally, one of these four international organizations is the EU. Well, it's now 27 countries because we left. This is slightly out of date, this slide, isn't it? So the UK was a key member of the EU from 1973. It became called the EU in 1992, but we were a member a long time before that, and we left obviously this year. So for those 47 years, we actually worked closely with that political bloc. A bloc is a grouping. So we worked closely with this entire bloc of countries as it grew and grew and grew. Because initially it was 3 countries formed it, and it sort of grew in various stages and expanded. But because we were a key member of that, we actually exerted lots of influence in the world by working together with our European political allies. And with our allies in Europe, we were able to exert political and economic sanctions on other countries. Sanctions is punishments. So with the EU, we could work together to say, right, we're so unhappy with that, we're gonna hurt your trade, we're gonna hurt your economy, and that's a strategy which countries and blocks of countries can use to influence other countries. So just to summarise, here are some of the organisations again. You've got to match them up. A, B, C, D. A is the UN. Which one could it be? B is NATO. C is EU, etc. You can work it out, but see if you can just now work out the answer. Why don't you pause it now? Pause the video, and I'll give you the answer. Okay, hopefully you've paused and unpaused the video. So A is clearly 3. B, NATO, is clearly this, a military alliance. The EU is clearly this one here, a political and economic union of 27 countries in Europe. That's the correct figure. And then D, G7, is here. Interestingly, Russia was part of the G8 until it was kicked out during the 2014 Crimea crisis. And that's the end of that lesson.